Hey, what's up everybody? It's Dallas with Gadget Hacks, and today I'm going to show you 10 things about iOS that would annoy any Android user. Now, I've been using Android devices ever since the days when they used to have physical search buttons, and I've never owned an Apple smartphone. This wasn't due to some blind allegiance to Android or some unfounded hatred for iOS either, because I always made sure to test out every iteration of the iPhone along the way. But just this month, I finally got my very first iPhone, and it's given me the chance to take a more in-depth look at the two biggest mobile operating systems. And I'll go ahead and spoil it for you up front. I still very much prefer Android, but if you're on the fence and you're thinking of making the jump to iOS, the minor annoyances I'll cover today may get you to reconsider. I'm not going to get into the big things like Siri versus Google Now or Android's openness compared to iOS, because those things have been covered more than enough already. Instead, let's just take this time to look at all the little things that Android simply does better. For starters, when you want to adjust brightness or volume sliders on Android, you just tap the slider at the point where you'd like it to be, then the indicator jumps to meet your fingertip. On iOS though, you actually have to drag it by this tiny little indicator, and let me tell you, that gets old real quick. Then this next one is something I doubt I'll ever get over. When you want to go back one screen on Android, you just tap the back button down here in the left corner. On iOS, yes, there is a swipe to go back gesture, but it's up to developers to implement that feature in their apps, and most don't. Instead, you're stuck doing thumb gymnastics trying to reach up to the top corner of your screen, which is where the back button normally is. Not only is that annoying, but you're also running the risk of dropping your phone if you use it one-handed. Next up is search. Almost all Android launchers will have a Google search widget built in, which means that if you want to know the answer to something real quick, you just type it in at the top of your screen. iOS has Spotlight search on its home screen, so you'd think the experience would be similar, but it's not. For whatever reason, Apple recently switched this over to Bing as its default search provider, so you already know it's going to be terrible right off the bat. But then when you search for something, you get useless suggestions from Siri, then a bunch of Bing suggestions, some app suggestions, then way down here at the bottom, there's a link to search the web. And that one opens an entirely separate app, so really your best bet is to just skip Spotlight search altogether. After that, I gotta say something about this command center interface. It's almost exactly like Android's quick settings menu, but there's one big feature it lacks. Sure, you can toggle settings on or off, but what happens if instead of wanting to turn Wi-Fi off, you just want to switch to a different network? On Android, these buttons can be expanded into mini menus that would let you handle that easily, and even if that doesn't work for you, you could quickly jump to the main settings menu. None of that happens on iOS, so I end up ignoring this menu more often than not. Then this next one is just odd in my opinion. Take a look at the back of this phone. You can see that it's an iPhone, and somewhere in the fine print there you can see the product code or model number, but nowhere does it say that this is an iPhone 6. Imagine you were buying this phone from a Craigslist ad. You're not quite sure if the seller was being honest about the generation, and you can't get an answer by reading the phone itself. So then you head to the About menu in Settings, and there's still nothing that says iPhone 5, iPhone 6, or iPhone 6s. But hey, at least we know that it was designed by Apple in California. That's the important part, right? Now this next one won't be a big deal in most cases, but it has the potential to cause some major problems. When you delete an app, you see how it says that it'll also delete all the app's data? Well, that's not exactly true. A lot of times, the apps will still leave behind bits of old data when you uninstall them, and that data will still be there when you reinstall. I've seen this already with the keyboard apps I've covered, where half of the settings were already configured when I ran through installation again on video. On Android, you can easily delete an app's data from the App Info menu, but there's nothing like this on iOS. So if you get stuck with an app that's crashing because of corrupt data and reinstalling doesn't fix it, the only way to be sure you got rid of all data is to factory reset your device, and that's just bad news. Here's my next issue. When you want a refund for something in the real world, you go back to the place where you bought it, right? That's how app refunds work on Android, where you just go back to the Play Store page and hit the refund button as long as you're within the refund window. But with iOS, the App Store itself doesn't provide an easy method for refunds, and instead you have to visit a separate website and fill out a report, or dig through menus on iTunes for Mac or PC. That's like going to the corporate office to get a refund for some spoiled milk you bought at your local grocer. Now this is one I've heard a lot of iOS users complaining about, so I know it's not just me. But believe it or not, there's still no official method for hiding apps on your iPhone's home screen. Instead, your best bet is to shove unwanted apps off into a folder in some corner and try to forget about them. And as an Android user, this leaves me with a feeling that the iOS home screen is basically just one giant app drawer, and that's hard to shake. Then next up, I gotta say something about this quote-unquote home button. Aside from touching the screen, it's the only way you can interact with an iPhone. So Apple's forced themselves into making this one button do 5 different things. You click it once, you go home. Click it twice, you'll see your recent apps. Long press the button, and of course Siri will pop up. But wait, there's more. 3 clicks will launch accessibility shortcuts, and a double touch triggers the reachability feature. So they got this one tiny little button doing way too many things. Aside from that, I'm not a fan of having such a centralized button be mechanical. Everything else you do on your phone is touch-based, but when you want to trigger any of these functions, it's a jarring click instead. To be fair, the same can be said about Samsung phones, but the vast majority of Android devices use on-screen or capacitive buttons, which is a much more consistent experience. Then finally, my last gripe is with iOS browsers. There's only one web view on iOS, and it's basically just Safari. So even if you install a third-party web browser, it still has to use Apple's default rendering engine. So even Chrome is really just a themed version of Safari deep down inside. But hey, I'm an Android user, so I'm obviously a little biased here. And to be fair, I'm working on an article that covers the flip side of these issues with 10 things that iOS does better than Android, so be on the lookout for that. But as far as these 10 annoyances go, I went into each issue with a lot more detail over at my full tutorial on Gadget hacks, so be sure to check that out. As always though, we'd appreciate it if you would like and comment on this video and subscribe to our channel. So we'll see you again next time folks, but until then, happy gadget hacking.